Hey, this is Ben with Feud Rewind with a quick word from our first unofficial sponsor. Water. You need some. I need some. We all need some. We're made of it. Guess what? It comes in a bunch of different varieties. Hot, cold, frozen. You can get it flavored. You can get it plain. With bubbles, no bubbles, out of your tap, out of a bottle, out of a box. The possibilities are endless. Regardless, you need some. Before we get started, go get a glass. I'm going to get one too. We'll meet back here and start the show. Thank you so much. Water.
April 13th, 1997 saw the pay-per-view debut of ECW with Barely Legal. For the last 18 months, Taz has been biding his time to get his hands on Sabu, and the clock has finally struck midnight. A rivalry built upon real-life animosity that has helped propel the regional upstart promotion up the ladder of the social consciousness. A feud that is almost entirely centered around emotions rather than trading match wins and losses back and forth. A feud centered around disrespect and loyalty. Don't you tap out yet. We gotta roll this back with a rewind. Welcome to the Feud Rewind. I'm your host, Benson Lance. The feud that we're rolling back this week is one of the more unique feuds that we've touched on thus far, in that this is a rivalry that isn't centered around a classic back-and-forth trading of wins and losses. Instead, this is a feud that revolves around both personal and professional disagreements and disrespect. For a storyline, at first blush, this might not sound like anything extraordinary. It appears to be the foundation of a traditional blood feud, and indeed it is. However, it takes the confluence of two galvanizing opponents and the island of misfit toys that they were fighting on that would help elevate the story to not only legendary status, but would help this story stand up against time as one of the best examples of long-term storytelling. But before we really crank this rewind back, we have to talk about the fellas involved.
It's time to get extreme.
Fellow Libra baby Peter Sinercha was born in 1967 in Brooklyn, New York. Growing up in the Red Hook district, the 1970s would normally lead one to develop a hardened exterior and a chip on their shoulder. However, Taz, like yours truly, is vertically challenged at roughly the same height of 5'9" on a good day, which, as I can tell you, definitely can make you feel some type of way. Early on, both his environmental and genetic factors would cause Taz not to skirt around issues and instead face them head on. This virtue would lend well in his scholastic sports career, with him excelling in both high school wrestling and football, where despite his short frame he would play linebacker and guard. He also pursued an interest in the martial arts, eventually earning a second-degree black belt in judo. After school, Taz would work a job installing railroad tracks and also bouncing at various bars while mulling over potentially pursuing a wrestling career. Receiving wrestling training from Johnny Rods out of the legendary Gleason's gym in Brooklyn, Taz would first wrestle under the moniker Kid Crush in Puerto Rico before moving on to the name the Taz Maniac. The first years of Taz's wrestling career was a non-stop uphill battle. During this era, size was a dominating factor in your position on the card. Being half the size of some of his opponents, Taz would face numerous roadblocks on his journey. He wrestled both domestically in International World-Class Championship Wrestling and Centrally Wrestling Alliance, while also doing tours internationally in Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Token tryouts in both WWE and WCW occurred in the early 90s. It would lead to little traction in getting signed with either promotion. years of continuing to work his straight job to provide for his family while using what little pay time off he acquired to wrestle independent dates was starting to wear thin on Taz. A man that had never been handed anything in his life, also, for better or for worse, had his life imitate his art. While initially utilizing high-flying lucha-inspired moves, and no doubt due to his size, Taz would grow his character gimmick into a mat-based technician that was more prone to suplex an opponent onto their head as opposed to hitting a corkscrew moonsault. No longer was he adorned with his luscious curls or his, quote, wild man gimmick. Replaced instead with a no-nonsense pit bull that you definitely wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of. All Taz needed was an advocate. Someone who could see the visceral emotion that seeped from Taz's pores and could help translate that into something easily digestible for an audience.
Madonna! The point of the matter is quite simple. Taz, the Human Suplex Machine, does not need a gimmick. Does not need to be a larger-than-life personality to wrap his hands around your body and drive your head through the stinking mat. To reach the top of his field, Taz just has to be himself. A human suplex machine. And the fact of the matter is, why should Taz be a larger-than-life personality when Taz is a larger-than-life man? The Taz maniac is dead. Long live Taz.
Fellow New Yorker Paul Heyman had recently started taking over the reins for the Philadelphia promotion Eastern Championship Wrestling, and was trying to rebuild this promotion from its status as an NWA territory into a promotion that was on the cutting edge of progression. Heyman had long been a fan of the Tasmaniac. In fact, Heyman had been the one to arrange the failed tryout in WCW, finally being able to get his hands on the human embodiment of a brick shithouse. Heyman would pair Taz with various partners over the next year, including Joe Chetty and Kevin Sullivan. It was with one partnership, however, that would intrinsically change not just Taz, but the promotion that had now changed from Eastern Championship Wrestling to Extreme Championship Wrestling. Taz's partnership with the suicidal, homicidal, genocidal, death-defying maniac, that is Sabu. Terrence Brunk was born in 1964 in Staten Island, New York, although he grew up in the Detroit area of Michigan. Being born into a wrestling family, as his uncle was Ed Farhat, known as the Sheik. Note, not Iron Sheiky, baby. Brunk would start training with his uncle after high school to be an in-ring technician and would debut under the ring name Sabu the Elephant Boy. The name Sabu being taken from the Indian-American actor Sabu, of whom his uncle was a big fan of. Making the rounds in various American independent promotions, Sabu would soon make his way overseas to Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling in 1991. It was in this Atsushi Onita-led promotion that Sabu would earn his stripes in the deathmatch style of wrestling these Japanese fans wanted. Undergoing dozens of no-rope, barbed wire death matches with the likes of Onita-san and Tarzan Goto, Sabu would endear himself as a competitor that had no bars, no filter, and often very little regard for his own body for the sake of his art. Sabu's most notable characteristic is often having to attempt the same maneuver multiple times, and more often than not, literally just fucking himself up more than his opponent. It was during this time that tape trading was nearing its apex. For those of you who are unaware of this term, this is literally where at the back of wrestling newsletters or dirt sheets, there'd be people looking for matches or promotions or what have you from areas that it wasn't available to them. And you would literally trade VHS tapes back and forth through the mail with strangers. It sounds fucking wild in 2024, and no doubt it was probably pretty fucking wild in 1994. As me, a 10-year-old, trading tapes with random motherfuckers just through the mail. However, it was during this time that tape trading was nearing its apex, and this style of wrestling was not well known nor well distributed in America. I can tell you that for certain. Personally, could not find that anywhere besides these very cryptic VHS tapes that sometimes showed up in the mail and sometimes didn't. The images of bloody, scarred, and on-fire competitors wrestling in a ring made of barbed wire that's currently engulfed in flames was fucking surreal, to put it lightly. Being referred by Todd Gordon and catching the eye of the aforementioned Paul Heyman, Sabu would finally gain a sense of firm ground in his home country by accepting an invitation to debut in ECW. Presented as a mute Hannibal Lecter-style madman, Sabu would quickly climb the ranks of ECW and in quick order enter into rivalries with Shane Douglas and hardcore legend Terry Funk. Becoming a one-time double champion, holding both the ECW World Heavyweight and TV Championships simultaneously, Sabu would form a tag team with fellow company man Taz. This move turned Sabu from a villainous heel into a beloved babyface, as the two went on to have tag feuds with stables like the Triple Threat and the Public Enemy, winning the tag championships from Public Enemy in February of 1995. Things came to a head, however, starting at the, quote, three-way dance, which was a live event ECW produced on April 8th of 1995. Originally scheduled as the main event was a triple threat match for the ECW Tag Team Championships. The current champions, Triple Threat, were set to defend against Public Enemy and Taz and Sabu. However, prior to the event, Sabu had accepted an offer to tour Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Sabu's reasoning was he had established himself in Japan, and while he was popular in ECW, he only wrestled occasionally. Without having his partner, Taz would fail to recapture the titles with his stand-in partner for the night, Rick Steiner. A few months later, on July 20th of 1995, Taz would not just face another obstacle, but his biggest one yet. While in match versus Too Cold Scorpio and Dean Malenko, Taz suffered a devastating neck injury when a spiked piledriver off the second rope didn't go quite as planned. Now on the shelf with a neck injury, and without his tag partner, Taz would fester in his rage, and the next time we would see him, he would not only be a much grumpier man, if that was possible, but we would also see him start to exact his revenge on those he held responsible for keeping him down. The entire fucking world. Taz would be out of action from July until December. During this time, he would make appearances with the Steiner brothers while recuperating from his neck injury. At 1995's November to Remember event that took place on November 8th, this is where things in our feud start to pick up. The event itself is notable for us for two reasons. First, concerning Taz, he would act as a special guest referee in a match between ECW Commissioner Todd Gordon and Taz's own manager, Bill Alfonso. Alfonso is the heel, and in dickish fashion, knocks out the originally scheduled referee, Beulah McGillicuddy. The two men fight back and forth until Gordon lands Alfonso with a frying pan. Gordon goes for the pin, and Taz runs out to take the place as the special officiator. He instead turns on Gordon and, ostensibly ECW, by punching him and pulling Alfonso on top of the unconscious Gordon for the 1-2-3 victory. After this match, Taz goes on the first of what would become many of his infamously scathing promos against both Paul Heyman and the ECW faithful for not only the lack of support for when he was injured, but also for their overwhelming support for the surprise return that happened earlier in the night's festivities. And that was the surprise return of Sabu. From Taz's perspective, this is a man that has gotten over by jumping through barbed wire tables without really any noticeable wrestling techniques. and a man without integrity, as Sabu jumped ship for a bigger payday as opposed to honoring his word. Taz, meanwhile, has to constantly fight, train, and scrape for the small amount of respect and adulation that he has received. The fact that a fighter with no valor could return to such a heartwarming ovation while the true warrior sat injured and underappreciated was going to be the jet fuel for this feud. Taz himself would ultimately get back into the ring the following month in December at Holiday Hell. And it was a dawning of a Taz we hadn't seen before. Gone were the long hair and the calculated flashiness. Instead, we had the now iconic black and orange singlet, with the focus being on mat wrestling and explosive suplexes. Explosiveness to such a degree that commentator Joey Styles renamed them Tazplexes whenever Taz was in the ring. Almost ubiquitous with wrestling now is the appearance of the tap out when a submission hold is applied. For the younger fan that might not be aware, this was not exactly commonplace in wrestling at all until Taz started unleashing his finisher, the Taz Mission, a move that pretty much is a Gata Hajime from Taz's judo background. Prior to this, most submission finishers either had to nod their yes to giving up or vocally yelling their relinquishment. This change in attitude and perception didn't happen overnight. Rather, this was years of trying to figure out what would work to appease an audience. Feeling like you just got proverbially shit on by all the fans and business in general, and now we're just unleashing pure rage via pure mastery of craft. This is right around the time that I personally came to know of Taz, and for me, he was instantaneously a gravitational force. One of the aspects that I wanted to most see in wrestling, and I would suggest that most people want to see in entertainment rather in general, is a sense of both fellowship and a reflection of oneself in that entertainment. In Taz, I saw exactly what in my wildest dreams I could be. A stocky suplexing machine that commands respect and garners fear from both small and large opponents alike. To me, my perception of Taz was that he was never presented in ECW as the quote small guy or even as an underdog. Little did I know this would probably be the only time that a competitor that is comfortably under 6 feet tall would be presented as an unstoppable force that used brute strength and cunning to ensure victory. While we did have talents a few other years later, such as Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho that were under 6 feet tall and became world champions and legends in their own right, I would suggest those respective reigns wouldn't have happened when they did if it wasn't for Taz and Paul Heyman presenting Taz as a legitimate shoot killer. Once the calendar year turns to 1996, Taz would go on to feud with the heart and soul of professional wrestling Tommy Dreamer and ascend up the ranks of ECW. Notably, at every opportunity he got a chance to have a microphone in his hand, he called out the man he wanted to face in the ring. The one man that has become the personification of his personal and professional life's struggles. Sabu. Months and months and months of Taz's beckonings went completely unanswered by Sabu. The two men were hardly, if ever, on screen together. The complete disregard for Taz's pleas were no doubt fuel to that fire. That is where part of the beauty of the feud comes in. An angry individual demanding attention and not receiving it on a regular basis, using whomever is standing in front of him as the proxy for Sabu, Taz would embark on a pathway of rage throughout most of the roster. The 1996 edition of November to Remember, the event that saw Taz's thunder stolen by the returning Sabu a year prior. This year's event kicks off with Taz interrupting Joey Styles, giving us the initial introductions, taking the microphone in a moment to steal Paul Heyman's thunder.
What's going on right now in the back? There's a bunch of wrestlers signing contracts what they're signing contracts for is this big show. This big show that's going to happen in the first quarter of the new year. That's right, Paulie. You son of a bitch, I'm ruining your surprise. I'm squashing your angle. You want to surprise the people? Fuck you. I'll give it to them.
The boss does not look happy. Talk about stealing somebody's thunder.
Taz announces that ECW's first big show is going to happen in the first quarter of the new year 1997, signaling ECW's first big pay-per-view event. He also adds that he guarantees that Sabu and him will fight off in the main event. The rest of November to Remember would go off with relatively few hitches, save for a mechanical event that happens after the Too Cold Scorpio match. After the match's completion, Taz would force Scorpio to leave the ring post-match, and would then go on an elongated, angry tirade, wherein he demands Sabu to come out and face him. The crowd is sort of with him too, as twice they are let in Sabu, Sabu chants in order to entice Sabu to make an appearance. After several wrestlers and other officials come to the ring to placate Taz, Paul Heyman finally makes his way ringside. Heyman reveals the reason that Sabu hasn't been answering Taz is that Heyman has asked Sabu as a personal courtesy not to confront Taz. Taz is understandably incensed at this, and he starts to put Heyman in the kata hajime. And then
The lights are out! And there's someone in the ring with Taz!
lights out. Lights on. Sabu and Taz are facing off across the ring as the ECW crowd erupts. The men circle each other and rush in for a lockup. Lights out. Lights on. Ring empty. Bullshit chants. The end of 1996 and the early part of 1997 saw Taz relentlessly going after Sabu at any given opportunity. During this time, Sabu was enjoying tag team success, teaming with Rob Van Dam, and RVD would run interference in between Sabu and Taz, causing a mini feud of sorts between RVD and Taz. Taz oftentimes would interrupt and attack RVD mid-match, causing potential wins against the Eliminators, for example, to slip through Sabu's fingertips, miming Taz's own frustrations in a way. In his own matches, Taz would be often facing off against, quote, lower-level talent, utilizing his Taz mission finisher in quick succession as he viewed these matches as secondary to his ultimate goal on getting his hands on Sabu. For the better part of 18 months, Taz has had to overcome a potentially career-ending injury, his tag team partner leaving him hanging high and dry only to return to more success, and not getting his requisite pound of flesh as a result. Taz's palpable rage, disappointment, and jadedness helped propel this feud along, as once again, Sabu was absent in responding, and by and large was sort of a mute character to begin with. However, the stage was set for both this feud and ECW as a whole to take the next leap into the cultural zeitgeist. ECW's first pay-per-view event, Barely Legal.
Sabu, we're going into a war. I hope you're prepared, brother, because Lord knows I am. And you know I am. And I know you fear me. And you should, Sabu. I'ma bust you up. I'ma bust you up so bad. I'm getting goosebumps, brother. I'm gonna take you out. I'm gonna hook my hold on you, and I'm gonna choke you out. I have no choice, Sabu. I'm going to choke you out. One more thing, Sabu. If I was you...
Hey there, this is Benzo with Feud Rewind, coming at you with a quick word from our second unofficial sponsor, the sun. That's right. Summertime is here, and the living, if your living is like mine, is extremely difficult. But what's not difficult is popping in your earbuds, putting on those headphones, using a little Bluetooth speaker, and going out into the sun while you listen to this podcast. You and me, let's go get some vitamin D while we enjoy the sun. Thank you, sun. Now back to the show.
I wouldn't be.
Barely Legal was the inaugural pay-per-view event for ECW, and its history deserves its own rewind as the genesis of Barely Legal and the difficulty that Paul Heyman had in executing this event. Well, it mostly stems from the infamous mass transit incident where, you know, if you know, you know, and if you don't, maybe it's better that you don't. Anyway, the April 13th, 1997 event would emanate from the hallowed halls of the ECW arena as just under 1,200 rabid fans had shown up to see the culmination of a near 2-year-long blood feud. Taz and Sabu are very well known to the ECW faithful by now, and everyone within the zip code is foaming at the mouth to see these two titans finally trade hands. The 7th match on a 9-match card isn't necessarily the place that you want to be, and it could very well be argued that this match should have been the main event if you're not opposed to having a main event be a non-world title bout. Taz has spent 2 years talking nothing but shit, and to a degree the crowd hates him mostly because he's whining and being relatively petulant at times. Sabu, mostly just due to his characteristics of yeeting himself through and into everything and everyone at any given opportunity, is just so over that he cannot be beloved by the crowd.
Ladies and gentlemen, Extreme Championship Wrestling presents the grudge match of the century.
The match itself starts with the classic Western standoff between the two. An exchange of slaps and punches quickly devolves into Taz suplexing Sabu to the outside, back into the ring, back to the outside, and the men end up brawling into and through the crowd. Sabu actually does successfully reverse the Taz mission at one point, with Joey Styles noting this has never been done before.
Sabu blocked it! Sabu blocked the Kata Hajime! No one has ever blocked the Taz mission! And what has got to be going through the head of Taz right now?
In this match, and in pretty much all of his matches, Taz displays a level of physicality that leaves little to the imagination, and he definitely lays it in stiff as fuck. Sabu gets some color from his nose and attempts his own Taz mission. It's only after almost 20 minutes and another flurry of T-bone suplexes and one last Taz mission that Sabu finally goes Mimi's and stays down for the count.
Crunched his neck! T-bone Tazplex, there it is! Sabu again dropped on his neck. The attack on Sabu's neck has been relentless. It has been evident. And there it is, the Kata Hajime, the Taz mission. And with the condition that Sabu's neck see how he could possibly fight off the Taz mission. The Kata Hajime
Taz finally gets his win, and post-match, Taz cuts a promo on Sabu, praising him for the fact that he finally showed up and given him a match that was more than worthy. Taz offers a rematch for any time and exchanges his hand in an olive branch of respect. Sabu accepts and embraces his one-time tag partner and friend in a truly heartfelt moment. A moment that is snuffed like a candle when RVD comes down to the ring and both he and Sabu start putting the boots on Taz. Taz's manager, Bill Alfonso, removes his Taz t-shirt to reveal the Sabu shirt underneath. This ends our canonical feud with the elusive double turn, as Taz walks out of Barely Legal as a babyface with a clean win, albeit with a concerted beatdown afterwards. And with Sabu, longtime fan favorite for his complete disregard to his body, showing that once again he's a snake in the grass. Showing Taz the respect that he had so much longed for, only for a split second, before pulling the rug out from underneath him. Now I say, quote, ends our canonical feud, unquote, as these two men, Taz and Sabu, are forever linked together and would continue to feud off and on throughout the end of their ECW runs. However, the following mini feuds would not have nearly the amount of emotional weight that their initial rivalry did. After this feud, Taz would wrestle into the early 2000s before departing for WWE. The years of injury and WWE's lack of seeing Taz's in-ring talents would lead him to joining the commentary team soon. He would leave the WWE for TNA/Impact and later AEW, where you can still hear Taz to this day drop one of his many hilarious one-line quips intersped with commentary that would be more suited for a traditional sports broadcast. Taz's ability to convey why certain physicality has different effects adds a layer of believability and conviction that is mostly lacking with other wrestling presentations, and he has quickly and forever has become an indispensable addition to any commentary team, and he'll forever be one of my favorite color guys, bar none. Sabu himself would go on to cement his status as an innovator of the deathmatch style, no doubt culminating in his infamous barbed wire death match against Terry Funk that resulted in a 10-inch gash cut so deep in Sabu's bicep that the muscle fell out and he had to ask his manager for duct tape so he could wrap his arm back up and continue. His career's high water mark was undeniably in ECW, although he would enjoy somewhat continued success into the mid-2010s. It should be stated that imagining a long, lengthy career from a deathmatch specialist is something of a fool's errand, but is nothing short of a miracle that Sabu is still alive and with us today. I do realize now that the 3 memorable moments gimmick that I started a few episodes back maybe might have been jumping the gun a little bit. In my attempt to give a condensed Cliff Notes syllabus to follow if you can't afford to watch hours of matches and segments, I feel like I overlooked the fact that those matches and those segments are exactly why these feuds are important and deserve a rewind to begin with. For example, in last week's episode featuring Gail Kim and Awesome Kong, instead of offering 3 distinct events or moments to reference, I implored you to simply rewatch the entire feud. In that example, it's because those women didn't receive excessive screen time, and thusly their feud is condensed just by default. The Taz and Sabu feud obviously does not suffer that same fate, as their rivalry went on for years. This feud, unlike every feud that we've rewound, only has one match that I've chosen to focus on. In this story, the match acts as the ultimate payoff, which is sort of weird, as in wrestling, the match is always the payoff, right? Granted, I don't think that anyone could have guessed that the Taz and Sabu rivalry would also have what would be considered the Taz and Sabu match. Typically, we would see payoffs of a few matches traded back and forth before an ultimate decider. Instead, what we got was a phenomenal example of the genius behind Paul Heyman. The entertainment is the build-up to the match, with the focus being on the storytelling. I often refer to wrestling as watching my stories, much in the same way that my grandmother used to refer to watching her soap operas. And that right there is what makes this feud great. It's literally a soap opera played out before our eyes, with the final reckoning being the match. I don't know whether this would be more Days of Our Lives or One Life to Live, but regardless, this was a story for the ages, and for that, I extend my deepest appreciation to Taz, Sabu, and Paul Heyman. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This takes us to the end of the feud for the week. I want to thank you for listening. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. If you have a feud that you would like to hear rewound, or if you have any other comments, please feel free to reach out to me at feudrewind@gmail.com. Additionally, we're on almost every social media platform as Feud Rewind. Fellow fan, once again, I am your host, Benza Lance, and I'll be back next week to roll it back with you with another feud to rewind.